Subject. One of the things in Russia is that there is a distinction between husband and wife. The husband is the head of the family. It's true. The wife is the neck. The wife is the neck, right? So thank you all for coming today. I have put together a couple thoughts about what we could actually learn from Russia. Sounds crazy, right? I wanted to first, though, thank my daughters for coming here. Sophia actually helped me. She helped me dial down my presentation. I was going a little far in. And I also wanted to call out that tomorrow is her 19th birthday. So a lot of people ask, well, why did you go to Russia? Kind of a strange place to go. And for me, it started with a bike ride. Like so many in my generation, the fall of the Berlin Wall ignited my imagination. We won the Cold War. Remember that? We won. Capitalism triumphed over socialism. Remember those days? Freedom over repression, or so it felt, 36 years ago. At the time, I was intrigued with what life was really like behind the Iron Curtain. And this all too curious 24-year-old just had to find out. So in the summer of 1990, I flew to West Germany with my Schwinn bicycle, and I pedaled east. Over 2 months, I traveled over 1,400 miles. East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, as it was called then, and Hungary. Now, the roads were terrible. Some of these seemed like they hadn't been worked on since Napoleon rolled through. But the hotels were a deal. It cost no more than $3 a night. Beers were less than a dime. And almost everyone was inquisitive about me as I was about them. Frankly, it was that attention that kind of fed into my psyche. I kind of felt special. And after cycling every day, I was in the best shape of my life. So in Berlin, I had the opportunity to sleep on that no man's land, which was once the Berlin Wall. On my way out of Poland, my wallet was stolen by an East German cyclist, of all people. Yeah. It was such a rarity to be a monoglot American stranded on a bike in southern Poland that the local interest office called the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw about me. The consular called me back, and he said, look, I can give you $50, just give me the money back when you're back in the States. And I thought about it for a minute. Here I was, this far in the journey, people had been so hospitable. What if I didn't take the money? When would I ever have an opportunity for a real adventure? Again, no language, no contacts, no safety net, no clue of what I was going to do tomorrow. Well, you know the answer, of course. I thanked the consular and told him, no, I don't need the money. I'll be fine. In fact, I was more than fine. I pedaled south into Czechoslovakia. Just riding a foreign-made bicycle made me a magnet and opened doors. Hospitable Czechs welcomed me into their newly independent country. A meal, a bed, sometimes a tour of the town. It was the kindness from strangers with whom I could barely speak. It was magical. I wish I could capture that. If only I could bottle it up again. It was pure, unfiltered optimism in the future of humankind. So back to Boston, I returned to the buttoned-up path I was on. I finished my master's degree at Tufts University and at least began to climb the corporate ladder at Fidelity Investments as a bond analyst. Now, I really enjoyed being a bond analyst. You get to figure out what bond's going to pay and what one's not going to pay. And, but I didn't like my little cubicle. It was gray and it was boring. And, you know, that great Gatsby dream of making it big in the wild east just kept pulling at me. So one day the phone in my little cubicle rang. An college buddy was calling from a crackling line from the Baltics, where he taught economics. Damn, he was living the dream, I thought. He didn't have much time. The call was very expensive. Look, he said, there's a lecture position in Lithuania, in Vilnius, $2,000 a month. Do you want it? Did I want it? I was nearly packed before I put the phone down. So that was my flight back to East Europe in the fall of 1993. Little did I know, I was about to drift into the orbit of George Soros and his Open Society Foundation. They were paying the $2,000. They were also quietly funding lectures like me to teach in the former Soviet world. Why was George Soros pouring millions into the post-Soviet pit? Sure, there were some altruistic reasons, spreading open societies, democracy, education, but there was also a very practical one, and it hit me the first time I met him in person. He'd come to give some speeches, and the president, Berezovskis, the president of Lithuania, had just won the first open election in the country. He loaned Soros his Mercedes and driver. So I began to think, that's when the game became a little clearer. Soros Open Society nonprofits build goodwill with the very politicians who controlled billions in state assets that was going to be up for grabs in privatization, right? It's brilliant. You fund lecturers like myself, scholarships, NGOs. You look like a global philanthropist and get great press while quietly gaining first mover advantage to the fire sale of the century. Altruism with an inside track. So I love teaching. But after a year, I left it and the Soros Foundation. I kind of wanted to make my own fortune, to seek my own way. I returned for a year to the Czech Republic, which had split from Slovakia in '93, to help build a new stock brokerage. Then, in April Fool's Day, 1995, I landed in Moscow. I visited the States over the years, but didn't return to live until 2009, 16 years later, when my wife and our, at that time, 3 daughters moved sight unseen into our home on the Mesa in Santa Barbara. So now you're probably thinking, what the heck were you doing for 16 years? To my pleasure and surprise, Russia promoted me well beyond my station. At the time, Americans, especially those that had Western training and a little Western experience, walked on water in terms of the job market. We got the very top jobs. By 1998, I had become the chief strategist for a company called Troika Dialogue that grew to become the largest independent stock brokerage in the country. We had over 2,300 offices. I likened my job to being a professional Russian tea reader in the best salon of Europe. I tried to figure out where the Russian market was heading, and I shared my thoughts with investors. For most of the time in Russia, I felt like I was living that scene from Forrest Gump You know, the one where all of a sudden Forrest is in all these famous pictures. He's behind JFK. He's all of this. I was like on the invitee list for events with Bill Clinton, James Baker, Larry Summers, backstage with Winston Marsalis, at the opera with Tony Blair. I rubbed elbows with former Russian opposition politician Alexei Navalny, had late night drinks with Boris Nemtsov. I don't know if you know any of those two names. Both of them have been murdered. And speaking of murder suspects, I once had a front row seat, as Vladimir Putin gave an investment presentation extolling Russia's great policies and prospects. So after delivering his remarks, he sits down directly across from me and crosses his legs. Beyond the close proximity, two unusual details stood out in sharp relief. After speaking, Putin didn't leave. Instead, he sat down to listen to the other speakers as though he had all the time in the world. And wasn't this guy running a country of 11 time zones? Curiously, the sole of his right shoe had a well-worn hole in it. It was at least as big as a silver dollar. Couldn't he afford to get new shoes? Or perhaps it was some type of cosmic metaphor for another hole in another soul. In terms of oligarchs, they became almost common feature of my professional life, especially once they decided to stop stealing their company's cash flows and instead worked on raising their share prices. Of the estimated 100 people who pilfered Russia during mass privatization, and again, I'm not including George in that, I'm looking at the domestic pilferers, I probably crossed paths with at least a third of them. Early on, my path crossed under less than friendly circumstances with a gentleman called Mikhail Khodorkovsky, then Russia's richest and most powerful oligarch. He owned a company called Yukos, the giant oil company that had more reserves than Kuwait. And he wasn't sharing any of his wealth. Tens of millions of dollars were siphoned off. Shareholders locked out of board meetings, all kinds of outrageous shenanigans. He was so brazen, I had to write a satirical primer on it called How to Steal an Oil Company. It was a backhanded guide to exactly what he was doing. You know, the investment community roared. They love this. The press loved it. They picked it up. Khodorkovsky, not so much. So he personally called my boss, demanding I be fired, deported, probably worse. But thankfully, my boss is a diplomatic, affable Ruben Vardanyan, diffused it. He said, in his deep accent, "Not all satire translated well," and to please be more careful. I lost a lot of sleep and a bit of my naivete, but I kept my job. So, you know, with that, I think it's worthy to look at what Russia can teach us at this time in our history. Now, we ridicule Mandami. I think we heard it today. And we should. We should ridicule him. We ridicule progressivism. And we should. We ridicule the woke mind virus and its divisive victim, oppressor mindset. And we should. These are all terrible, failed ideas that are, again, being recycled. But if we want to inoculate America against the socialist pathogen, why not learn from the country that was first infected, suffered immense harm, died, and rose again as a capitalist country? Why tolerate the new wave of socialism here in America if we can strike it at its root cause? So here's what few realize. Russian youth has rejected socialism. That's despite international sanctions, conscription in the army, in a calcified political system only slightly worse than California's. Just 10% of Russians aged 18 to 24 support socialism. In the US, anyone know? 30%. 30%. I think it varies by locale, but overall 30%, 3 times higher. Honestly, what the hell happened? I think we can talk to what happened in the US, but I'd like to kind of focus on what happened in Russia. How did they keep this out? And so the question is, why don't the Russian youth buy into socialism? And there's a lived memory aspect of it. If your parents or your grandparents have endured it, then socialism isn't quite as trendy as the virtue signaling drivel from elite universities. It's actually famine, gulag, breadlines. That's what it means. Reagan nailed it, though, in terms of how politics move through families. Politics is not passed through the bloodline. Sharing wisdom doesn't mean they're going to take it. There's also the advantage that Russia has of no woke indoctrination. Russian schools skip the radical ideologies of victim-oppressor narrative. I mean, that's Marxism, the workers and the capitalists, victim-oppressor. They got enough of that poison during the 80 years of class warfare. Russians don't need groups like Fair Education Santa Barbara to fight to get that out of their schools. And actually, while you're here, I just wanted to call out Sheridan Rosenberg and Greg Andridge for the great fight that you joined in. But I think there's a real anchor out there that's also being missed. The Russian youth have economic skin in the game. Unlike many young Americans who feel locked out, Russians are invested, and they have at least a foothold on the ladder of security. There's a fun fact for you here. 92.6% of Russians own their own home. Right? Yes. This is often referred to as the world's highest home ownership rate. Now, the Western press, the reason why you don't know is because it took a long time. It's kind of a positive story, and the Western press didn't cover it. I would have to say, if you were visiting me in Moscow when I was there, I probably wouldn't even talk about it either. It wasn't about the market and the shares and the politics. It was actually about vesting people with the country. So you have to wonder how this happened. In 1917, at the dawn of the bloody Bolshevik Revolution, 85% of urban Russians were renters, right? Now, a century later, 100 years later, the tables have completely flipped.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you real quick.
Sure.
The owner said that there's a silver-colored gray Ford out in the back parking lot here.
Do you want me to read it off here so you make it easier?
Yes, and they need to move it for...
Yeah, so it's a silver Ford 8CLX030.
It's
Do we have a winner? Do we have a winner?
It's blocking.
Okay. All right, congratulations.
Thank you, Jim.
Yeah, just don't tell them what happens next, okay? So now, as I said, home ownership has completely flipped in the vast majority. So what happened was in 1992, Boris Yeltsin signed the law on the privatization of housing stock. And he rewrote the rules for ownership. Since then, over 62 million units have been privatized. 62 million units. It was a very simple process. You had to live in the apartment, you had to be an adult, and you could only do this once. How fair was that, right? There's really no gaming the system. Once it's yours, you could renovate, you could borrow against it, you could pass it to your kids. That's why they have something. There's full ownership. Let's just compare that to the States, right? So overall in the US, home ownership is about 65, 66%, right? But look at the trouble spots, folks. New York City. Anyone want to guess what home ownership is of the 5 boroughs?
30.
Yes. How'd you know that? I need to, okay, all right. Yes. So just 1 in 3 persons have their hand on the rung of the real estate ladder. Only 1 in 3 persons have skin in the game. Everyone else is like, hey, rent's due, it's expensive. So if you're a young person with no stake and no rung ladder up, why not vote for the radical promising to burn it all down? And I think that's an insight as Republicans we need to have. So thankfully, our government doesn't yet own all the housing stock. Well, yeah, our government doesn't. So how do we achieve at least a plurality of owners out there? 50-50, 50 owners, 50 renters. And so I have a couple. I didn't want to just bring to you some, problems. I want to bring a couple ideas. They have nothing to do with infill. They have nothing to do with new construction or other development issues. This is purely about ownership. The first thing we could do is kind of what Margaret Thatcher did and what Boris Yeltsin did. Privatize the Santa Barbara Housing Authority assets. Right? We go out there and we tell people, you know what, you want a home? Elect us, we'll give you that home. All right? That's what was going to change things. We have right now Section 8 housing. You're probably familiar with that process. How many people ever get off Section 8 housing? Never. That's right. It says 1% plus or minus 1%, right? Nobody gets off it. All we're doing with our housing policy is keeping people generationally poor. Then the next generation comes up, they say, what American dream? What do you mean? We have to pay rent. I'll never get a stake. It's too expensive. So I think that's the easy one. That's the low-hanging fruit. Peter?
So with Boris Yeltsin's plan, did the Russian have to come up with cash in order to buy into the
No.
government? So they got it for zero.
They got it for zero.
Well, did Margaret Thatcher do that?
Margaret Thatcher had the right to buy, and I think that required an upfront payment. I'm not sure, to be honest. I mean, I think if you're looking seriously in privatizing the Santa Barbara Housing Authority, I looked at their balance sheet. You could sell the units that they have around 60% discount to market price, pay off the debt, and you'd be done. There's no taxpayer loss. We've already lost. We've been paying for this ridiculous program. Quite frankly, it's serfdom, if you think about it.
But the buyer would have to come up with some cash.
Sure. Yeah, that's right. My proposal is not the Bolshevik proposal. That's been tried. We take all the ownership that we want and we give people nothing. That's not it. I'm talking about mutually beneficial exchange, not victim oppressor. Mutually beneficial exchange. You are an apartment owner, and the second idea is, if you can have apartment to condo conversions straight across. No approvals, no nothing. You want to break your place up into 10 units? You can do it. Guess what? There's 10 people there, have the right to buy. They don't want it, someone else buys it. But you turn those 10 renters into 10 owners. Republicans, we can't think that, but they'll become less radical. That's what we need. We're fighting against radicalism. So, I guess what I hear from a kind of a party point of view is I'd say that, the party of Lincoln should really become the party of home ownership. We freed the slaves. We gave women the right to vote. We championed civil rights. Surely we can put a deed in someone's hand, right? So I think if we can flip this issue, it's a radically different way to think about it. But if we can flip the table on this progressive march to socialism, Republicans could rule California for decades because you get rid of the radical progressivism at its core. So I'm not sure how much time I have left. 10 minutes? Oh, awesome. Okay, I'm going to be very quick.
Yeah, aside from helping to create an ownership society, those folks would have more of an incentive to be productive members of society because the Section 8 requires you to keep your income
That's right.
at a certain level. Dare to work too much, make too much money, you're going to lose everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was in Russia in 1990, and I can see where what happened in Russia was necessary because the suicide rate was skyrocketing. They were dealing with having an entire country of people that were disillusioned by even living. So they had to do something radical in order to have control of their entire populace.
Yeah, they did, but it worked. It worked.
They did.
There's a lot of problems in Russia. In fact, that's the next point I wanted to make is what we shouldn't learn from Russia. We shouldn't learn some things. Don't be a Putin, is I guess my advice. So whether you're in high office or low office, you should never, and we as Republicans should never use our political power to grow our own political power, right? As a quick refresher, how this worked in Russia, Putin gets elected. He called a meeting of the oligarchs in 2000, a group probably the size of this. And he said, hey, I got a deal, right? You guys can keep your wealth. I'm not going to go back, but stay out of politics, right? Now, the really smart ones understood what he was doing, but most of them were like, okay, I'll keep it. Oh, we're done. We'll do it. And so what Putin did after he controlled the oligarchs, which was popular, he then took over the legislature. It used to be like our Senate. We would have elections from the region. He appointed the senators, right? He also got involved in the legal system, changed that to tilt towards the Kremlin. He had constitutional changes to get more power. And also, thank God we're not funding PBS anymore. But most Russian media is state-controlled, and he, of course, controls that. So what happens with this, of course, is that, without checks, there's no brakes. And I think a lot of people look at Russia now in the news because of the war in Ukraine. And I would wager if there was a little bit more checks and balances, we wouldn't have had that invasion. That and perhaps a different president in the United States. So, what's the litmus test? It's misusing political power to increase your own. And, a public servant serves the people. A tyrant serves himself. So let me talk about some examples. I have to thank my daughter for helping me with these. The first one, well, this was mine, lower caps in the supervisors. Okay? That's tyrannical behavior. Voting on a 48 or 49% pay rise for yourself. How did that help us? It didn't. That was pure self-interest. It gets worse as you go up, right? Prop 50, which you guys have mentioned, that changes the Constitution in order to make it easier for, I call him Slick 50, for Newsom to run for president, right? It's pure self-interest. And just to make it clear, changing the Constitution like that is exactly what Putin has done. Exactly what he's done, right? And this is where my daughter really helped me. He said, James, well, Papa, don't be so one-sided. You have to look at your own side, right? And I'm like, I guess so. So, even here in Santa Barbara in the GOP, we endorsed our own candidates for Central Committee. I don't know if many people know about that. And whenever we did it, we kind of acting like Putin, and we really shouldn't. We have to be in whether we're high position or low position, Bob gets in that position. I'm expecting him to work for the people, not himself, right? So my final thoughts I'd like to share just one of my favorite socialism quotes by Ronald Reagan. Socialism only works in two places. Heaven, where they don't need it, and hell, where they already have it. Thank you so much. I don't know, is there any questions? Congressman?
Yeah, so, you've probably been to more places in Russia than I have, but what I saw in Russia was what I'll call a facade. Alright, so and I just want your 2 cents on this, because that's exactly what I see here too. I see blue skies, I see sunny weather, not this weekend of course, but most of the time, I see the Spanish tiles on the roofs, and what's happening here is every category in the economy here is literally worse in California than anywhere else in the entire country. We're number one in homelessness, number one in poverty, number one in worse in home ownership, worse in wage gap. Every single thing is completely worse here, so it's like this facade that everyone comes out, I call it the vitamin D doping that everyone has here, right? So that's what I saw in Russia. So when I pulled into Russia, we pulled in next to 3 of Russian ships, and we pulled our ship into Russia, in Vladivostok. And the other side, so we saw the Russian ships, and I thought the Russian fleet was pretty terrible, right? But I looked at all the ships, and I'm like, man, these things are all brand new painted. They look better than we do. What's going on? And then when we got off the ship, we looked at the other side. And the other side looked like they were pulled up from the bottom of the ocean. They were completely rusted out, falling apart. It was all just fake. And every person there, the people there were amazing people. And they treated us like celebrities everywhere that we went. But there was this constant battle between the mafia there, trying to control every dollar that was there, and they control everything in the black market, and the people there that had businesses or whatever that were just trying to get an American buck into whatever, their restaurant, whatever they were doing. And so I just see that, you were probably in some of the bigger government areas, much bigger facade. But that's what I saw there, is that this whole socialism thing is just one big facade where everything underneath the hood is just falling apart.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up, Bob, because one of the points I wanted to make, I didn't want to get too long, but, socialism is discussed in terms of efficiency, but we really need to discuss it in terms of morality, right? Thou shalt not steal, taking from the neighbors. What is that all about? Why does someone have something that I need to get? That's crazy. Thou shalt not bear false witness. There's a lot of lying that goes on, right? Unfortunately, that society, we can look at it from the housing and say, oh, they did this one thing right. And I'm so glad they did, because they're not going to be a communist country in my lifetime, right? They're not going to go into socialist. But we should realize how dangerous that is, and we need to protect America from it. This is a lovely country. People have really wonderful views about each other and working together and being cooperative. That gets destroyed in socialism. Very, very much destroyed. So thank you, Bob. Yeah, go ahead.
My question from Monica Eiler, who immigrated here from Norway after World War II. She wanted me to ask you, why do you think Americans equate socialism with Norway, where the people get a check from the oil revenues, etc., versus associated with a communist country, whether it be Russia or Cuba or Laos or North Korea? Why do people?
I think, well, when we're making an argument,
get something?
when we're making an argument, we all try to cherry pick the strongest case. It's like trial lawyers, right? They're going in there and seeing how they can convince you. So you start talking about Norway, and you kind of forget about the millions of people that died during the Russian Civil War, or the millions of people that died during Mao's reign, or the millions of people that have died in Africa. Once let's talk about Norway. We can do that. Well, it's great. Norway's able to do this. Let's see. Is everywhere able to do it? And I think that the history has shown that it's been impossible, because what happens, it's the old joke about the cows. You got 2 cows. Under socialism, government takes it, gives it to your neighbor. Under communism, they take both cows and they give you back the milk. It's only under capitalism that you're able to buy a bull, right? And I think maybe they're able to, for a certain period of time, live this way, but human nature is the same around the world. It's around the world the same, right? And I just don't think, we may be looking at a particular time there, but I know how the story ends.
Do we need financial literacy in our schools?
Possibly. Possibly.
Absolutely.
But I do think it's the personal incentive of not being able to see your way up in America. We need to be the party that shows the rungs forward, the rungs higher.
Last question.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
So you only worked for Soros for a year?
For 1 year, yeah.
Yeah. But do you have any insights into what happened to him? Because I heard him testify before Congress like 20 years ago. And he sounded like a libertarian capitalist.
Yeah, I think what happens, it's the billionaire disease. Once you get a lot of money, like when he came to Vilnius when I met him, I was wanting to talk about a particular academic issue. All the people around wanted to be there because they were funding him, right? And I just think it's an unhealthy environment for such a long time. And then you're sitting there in New York City and people are like, well, you might have $1 billion, but are you virtuous? And they, to do, what I'm saying? I do think, but he did change. The George Soros that I saw was very different than what you see now. And it's really being run by his son, Alexander.
Really quick here. When I was in Russia in 1990, one thing that I noticed was that the government was controlling the population with vodka. You could not get filtered water, but you could get vodka.
Yeah, that was the original opiate of the masses.
Free. And now we're dealing with a similar situation with the liberals letting all these free drugs into our country. It's the same situation.
Yeah, there's a lot of lessons out there. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Is that?
I'm sorry, do you want to ask him your question after you go for it, please?
Well, I actually wanted to make I concur that we have to, especially the Republicans right now, it's very important that we project a plan and a message that gives people that are my kids age, I don't want to start crying, hope. Because right now, it's the hopelessness of these outrageous student loans, which in my opinion just cap the student loans at 2%, and then instead of forgiving student loans for people that look a certain way, have certain immutable characteristics, student loans across the board at 2%, people would pay them back a lot easier, a lot faster, and wouldn't feel so buried by them.
Mm-hmm.
The second thing is this sense of hopelessness that they'll never be able to afford a family and keep a roof over their heads or provide for that family. And it's really, and this is just why it's taken root in that generation right now, is because they're really angry. And you know what? They have every right to be really, really angry. Because the baby boomers took it all. They got the cushy jobs with the retirement, the loaded retirement. They got the cheap home loans. They got the cheap. The UC system used to be affordable, and it was for California kids with the C average, and it was attainable, and it was very, very affordable. It's not that way anymore. It's filled with foreign students. So I just think that in order for the conservative movement to really go to the next level, they need to listen to what those kids are very angry and afraid and stressed about, and start dealing with it immediately. And one more point, I think that J.D. Vance, love J.D. Vance, Nobel Elegy was an amazing book and movie. But you know what? He is the one guy who should be, okay, fine, we're taking care of the cartels. It's a long haul. It's not going to be easy. But he should be addressing the fact that families can't afford to put their family members in rehab. It's a racket. It's 20, 30 grand. People putting on multiple credit cards. The government threw the borders wide open and created a mess. And I do think the government needs to take it on. And I think J.D. Vance should really carry that mantle forward.
Okay,
James,
quick one, please.
yeah, quick one. It seems that the people that are running for office are appointed by the Democratic Party. And based on what was just said, then they make certain that people that are working government jobs get pay raises and on and on and on. And what is it that conservative Republicans, anybody in general, can do to say, to point out the fact that these politicians that are running as Democrats have been appointed by the party and work in primaries by and large, such as the presidential election last year?
Yeah. I'll be very brief. I think we need to get into their grill about the progressive policies that have failed them. Right? That's it. We go in, the housing thing is really a sweet spot because there's history. Margaret Thatcher, what happened in Russia, and there's a lot of assets that we're paying for that are just not, they're not helping anybody. I want people to own.
Can we ask the last
Yeah.
3 questions afterwards? I'm sure James isn't going to rush out of here, but if that would be okay.
I'm not rushing.
Because we're kind of watching the clock. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much.
James is so humble. Starting the Current, he's done so many amazing things, and he is so freaking humble. He told me early on when I asked him if he would be a speaker, am I going to be a fill-in? And I said, hell no, you're going to be one of the featured speakers we've had all year long, because I know he's got a wealth of information, and he's the humblest person you can imagine. So thank you.